in the boxing ring, but more importantly, a legend outside the ring. He won and defended the heavyweight championship in epic fights from exotic locations. He proudly defended and advocated for his culture, being both African American and a Muslim. And during the Vietnam War, he famously refused to be drafted into the army due to his religious beliefs. Simply put, he was an icon unlike anyone the world had ever seen. Stephen A., what are your thoughts and reactions to the passing of Muhammad Ali?
Well, my first thought is my heart goes out to his family. My deepest condolences. As Skip well knows, I'm friends with his daughter Layla Ali, who's was a marvelous boxer herself. One of the most wonderful people that I know. She's obviously incredibly heartbroken over the loss of her father, and my heart goes out to her. What I would tell you is that when you think about Ali, so many people think about his greatness as a boxer, and of course we can appreciate that. We remember the 5 losses, of course. Joe Frazier, the first loss, and thereafter, he lost to Ken Norton, lost to Larry Holmes, and Trevor Burbick and Leon Spinks before that. But he won 57 fights, won 57, 56, 57 and 5, I think, 37 knockouts. We remember how he won the title in 1964 over Sonny Liston, when Sonny Liston was George Foreman before George Foreman was the most menacing boxer in history, and Ali ultimately knocked him out by employing the rope-a-dope philosophy, and that worked to his advantage, obviously, because he tired him out. We think about his greatness as a fighter, but I assure you, if you are a black man, that's the last thing you actually think about, as great as he was. What you think about is the trials and tribulations that he had to deal with, the adverse circumstances that he had to deal with, how incredibly unfair it was that he had to deal with those things, and how he lifted himself up. And not only that, that eventually of a nation, and then of course globally. Think about in 1964 when he beat Sonny Liston, and then he immediately comes out and confirms that he's a member of the Nation of Islam. Think about when his name was changed to Muhammad Ali. Think about when reporters refused to call him by his name. Think about when Floyd Patterson refused to call him by his name, and he was in the ring with Floyd Patterson knocking him out and screaming at him all the while, "Say my name, say my name." Think about that. Think about the fact that he refused to enter the Vietnam War, and he uttered the phrase, "No Viet Cong ever called me the N-word." How he was stripped of his title, labeled a draft dodger, deemed a pariah by the United States of America, the government. How he was sentenced to 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, but didn't go to jail because he appealed it, and it took him 3.5 years to get back in the ring because he was stripped of his title and wasn't allowed to fight anywhere. And think about all of those things. And think about the fact that ultimately when he came back after a 3.5-year hiatus and beat Jerry Corey, how he ultimately lost to Joe Frazier. And Joe Frazier caught him with that left hook in the last round and dropped him. But that by sheer will and pride, he stood up because he refused to allow white America or anyone else who hated him to see him on his back. Bringing tears to the eyes of the great Bryant Gumbel and others who said that when Muhammad Ali lost that night, we all lost, because what he stood for and what he represented wasn't just for himself, wasn't just for the Nation of Islam, it was for black people everywhere. It was because so many folks who are African Americans, who are Africans, felt disenfranchised, prejudiced against, etc. And sort of to the point where they were brainwashed. We were brainwashed into believing that we were less than what we were, and then we saw this man who was great in every way, who was unapologetic about telling you he was great, who went into the ring and went about the business of handling his business with greatness, and then reminded you not only was he great, but he was pretty too. So he just had such a level of confidence and such a level of belief in himself, and to go and to have that in the face of all of this adversity, and all of these adverse circumstances, and to still be that way, it uplifted a nation of black people and black people everywhere to believe in themselves, because we said, hey, if he could do that under such adverse circumstances, what excuse do we have to be otherwise. And those are the kind of things that you remember. I was 3 years old when I saw my first fight. It was Ali versus Joe Frazier. I used to think it was Cleveland Williams, but that was earlier, before I was born. It's just that my father used to show me tapes of Cleveland Williams, and I thought that was it. But the first live fight I ever saw was him losing to Joe Frazier. But I give you those stories, Skip and Molly, because those are the stories that my dad echoed to me. When Ali got dropped and Ali got up and Ali lost to Joe Frazier, that was the first time in my life I ever saw my father cry. I never saw it before, and the only time I saw it after was when my brother died. So in my 48 years on this earth, I saw my father cry 2 times. Once was due to the loss of his son, my brother, in 1992, and the other was 21 years earlier in 1971 when Ali lost to Joe Frazier. These are the kind of memories that stay with you, and it just epitomizes and cements the greatness of Muhammad Ali and why he was so great. It wasn't because of his greatness as an athlete. It was because it was his greatness as an athlete backing up what a great and prideful and powerful and inspirational man he was to a nation of people, if not globally. He can never be forgotten. He will always be appreciated, and he will always be revered by any black man with sense, any black person with sense, and beyond, of course.
I deeply appreciate your perspective on the passing of this great man from the black perspective. Now, if you will, can I give you the perspective of a white guy who grew up in Oklahoma City through the 60s, and this man became my all-time favorite athlete even in the 60s. May I remind you, as your dad taught you, and you can attest, that in the 60s, when Ali broke through against Sonny Liston, 64, and then beat him again in 65, that the heavyweight champion of the world was a big deal. It was the most prestigious position to me in all of sports. And I think our younger viewers can't really appreciate just how the aura that surrounded, the mystique that surrounded owning that championship belt, the heavyweight champion of the world. And in that year in 1965, I'm going to remind you, the National League MVP was Willie Mays. The NFL MVP was the great Jim Brown. And the NBA MVP, as the NBA was just starting to gain some traction, was Bill Russell. Well, that's quite a Mount Rushmore. Willie Mays, Jim Brown, Bill Russell. But for me, a white kid in Oklahoma City, the guy who captured my fancy and my imagination and my heart was this kid from Louisville who was originally called Cassius Clay, and he was dismissed by a lot of the white reporters as the Louisville Lip. Remember all this? And then, as you say, he converted to Nation of Islam. And it shook a lot of people up because Muhammad Ali stood up 65 and 66, and Stephen A., he said, "I am black and I am beautiful." I'd never heard a black man say anything remotely like that. And it gives me chills to say it today. Remember, I'm just this white kid in Oklahoma City. That moved me that he had the courage to make that statement publicly, because Jim Brown, as proud a black man as he was, and you'll find none prouder or stronger, but he didn't wear it on his sleeve like that. Because, as you know, in the 60s, you're way out on the limb, man. And he said it, and he backed it up. And then he drove it home in 67 when he said to the United States government, "No, I won't fight that fight. I got no quarrel with those Viet Cong." And just for a little, I don't know how old you were at that point. I was like 9th, 10th grade, in that range, coming up on 11th maybe. But
which year are you talking about?
This is 67 when he said no. He became a conscientious objector.
I was born in October of 1967.
You got it. Okay, so I can frame this for you a little better. That Vietnam War in 1965, we finally sent the Marines in to win a ground war. And I thought, here we go. And the nation was behind the Vietnam War at that point in 65, because we're trying to stop the spread of communism in Vietnam. They're backed by the Chinese and the Russian communist governments. We got to stop them from taking Cambodia and Laos and moving through Asia. And I thought, red, white, and blue, here we go again. We've done it in Korea, we're going to do it in Vietnam. You know, here we go. God bless America. And it was a war that we couldn't win because they were fighting with tactics we'd never seen before. So all of a sudden, from 65 until 67, the public sentiment started to swing against the Vietnam War. So here came Muhammad Ali, who said in 1967, I got no beef with them. I don't want to fight that fight. And to me, I had to stop and think, because remember, there was a draft lottery that was coming right in that period where I was having to make peace with, am I going to have to go fight this fight because I might get drafted? And the lottery came, and my birthday came up number 305, which is way down the line. And I got to tell you, for the record, I'm going to say it on national TV, I was relieved I didn't have to go to Vietnam. Now, the war was starting to unwind at that point. We were starting to back out of it because we couldn't win it. But so the reality was I wouldn't have had to go anyway. But I had a year or so where I had to make peace with, I might have to go fight this fight. Well, remember, the difference in this and World War II was the Vietnamese, North Vietnam, didn't attack us, you know, like Japan obviously attacked us. Germany wanted to attack us. So we're fighting a World War II on two fronts for our freedom. But do you know how many battles I got into with people older than me where I would defend this man? And veterans of World War II and the Korean War would say, how dare him? So many of us fought for the freedom of this country, for the land of the free and the home of the brave, and he refuses to fight for our freedom. And I'm saying, I don't think it's for our freedom. And again, he's doing this on religious grounds, Nation of Islam, nonviolent. It's a faith built on peace. And I said, you cannot condemn him for that, because at the height of his power, for 3.5 years, he could have fought maybe 14, 15 more fights. These would have been big paydays, like in today's, you know, Floyd Mayweather sort of paydays. These are hundreds of millions of today's kind of dollars he left on the table for 3.5 years because he truly, conscientiously objected to what we were doing in Vietnam. And fortunately for him, the public was starting to agree. Then he had that summit in Cleveland where Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Jim Brown, Bill Russell, they stood behind him. They stood in solidarity. And it was a powerful statement. And all of a sudden, the nation swung anti-Ali, and I'm talking about a lot of white America here, to pro-Ali, because he took a stand that a lot of white Americans were coming around to. He was ahead of the curve. And then, as you well know, and we don't have time to get into it, as his boxing career wound down, Ali became a statesman, man. I mean, he's touring the globe, freeing hostages. You know, that's because of his faith.
I will say this. I got a lot more to say, and I know we're going to break, and because it's a point that I wanted to piggyback off of, based off of what you just brought up, that I think is important to make. So we'll be back.
That was fantastic perspective, by the way, Skip. Thank you. More on the passing of Muhammad Ali when we return on First Take.